Welcome. It's great to have you all with us. Greetings to our Q&A with the filmmaker and Upper Valley native, Ben Kalina. I hope you've all had a chance to watch Short Up. It is open until midnight tonight. So anyone who hasn't, you still have a chance, and it's okay if you're here. You can listen and then watch later. My name is Ginevra. I am the program director at Sustainable Woodstock. Sustainable Woodstock was founded in 2009, and we're a nonprofit community and environmental action and education organization that builds on Woodstock's legacy as a birthplace of the modern conservation movement. Our vision promotes vibrant, inclusive, thriving communities where we live sustainably now and into the future. You are joining us for a Q&A of Short Up. Short Up is part of our monthly climate change and sustainability film series. It's co-hosted by us, Sustainable Woodstock, and Pentangle Arts. We host a monthly free screening of films and documentaries that are focused on climate change and sustainability. We do it as a way to foster, in a fun and relaxed environment, a broad awareness of a huge range of issues concerning our planet and our future. So this series is made possible by our underwriters, the Vermont Community Foundation and Mascoma Bank, and sponsors LOA Group, The Unicorn, Yankee Bookshop, and Mark Knott DDS. Great. So before we get started, I'll just quickly run through our kind of very loose meeting plan here. So we are recording right now. Excellent. And I will send this recording out to everyone here who is registered afterwards. You are currently muted. If you've joined us, you should not have the ability to unmute. So as we go, if you have questions for Ben, please type them in the chat box on Zoom. If you're unfamiliar with Zoom, there should be a little bubble that says chat at the bottom of your screen. If there's not, run your cursor over the ... more tab. It should show up, and under that, you should have an option to join chat. So once again, any questions, just throw those in the chat. And Michael, our director, who's joining us, and myself will pose those to Ben. Otherwise, we're going to follow up with the recording, any info that Ben wants us to share. And I will also include next month's film, which is Motherload, and it focuses on bicycling as transportation. So I think that's almost it for me. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Ben. I'm going to give your bio here, Ben. So Ben Kalina is an Upper Valley native and award-winning documentary producer and director whose work explores the colliding forces of human nature, social and environmental change. His first feature documentary, Short Up, explores sea level rise and the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy as it ran headlong into unchecked coastal development. Short Up won the 2014 Sundance Institute's Light Stay Sustainability Award and was broadcast on DirecTV. His In Progress feature documentary, Plan C for Civilization, follows the scientist at the center of the controversial field of solar geoengineering, a technology designed to cool a quickly warming world. Ben is now a professor of film at Drexel in Philadelphia, where he lives with his wife and kids. Okay, I'll stop talking now, Ben, and you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out here tonight. Nice to see you all. I am an Upper Valley native, which makes this really nice. I don't get a chance to screen my films there all that often, but I grew up in Hanover, and I'm sorry if I'm outing you here, Judy, but I may be wrong, but it's a small world, and I think Judy Pond may have been my English teacher who's in the room here. So if not, and it's a coincidence, I apologize, but hey, how are you? That's so cool. Wow, that's great. Yeah, I did grow up in Hanover, and like I was saying before, I think that like my interest in this area, at least of storytelling, which is really kind of what consumes me in terms of dealing with climate and environment, really is driven by growing up in the Upper Valley in growing up initially in Killington with my parents in the ski industry, and just, being surrounded by all the natural beauty, and just understanding its vulnerability as well. So that's something that I carried with me for a long time before I figured out how to kind of combine that with my interest in filmmaking, which is something that over time as well. But at this point, my films deal with all kinds of different aspects of climate environment. Short Up was a film that I made so it's about 10 years old now, I guess. And I made that film starting as a graduate student at Temple University here in Philadelphia. When I was interested, I'd read a book, which I don't know if some of you are familiar with, John McPhee. He's a wonderful writer, naturalist. He wrote a book called The Control of Nature, which I really found very intriguing, which actually was recommended to me by another friend of mine from Hanover, Noah Finnegan, or Norwich, I should say, actually, who is a geologist now. So we often talk about, some of the interesting things that he's looking at. And he told me about this great book, and I read this book, and it really struck me the way in which, McPhee explored these three different places where humans kind of inadvertently maybe put themselves in awkward positions in harm's way, where we are sort of testing the boundaries of our ability to withstand the force of nature. And so I was really interested in that concept. And when I looked around, being in Philadelphia for a story like that, I saw that there were these barrier islands that I'd been to a couple of times. And down here, people say they go down the shore. That's like how it's referred to, which took me a while to get used to. But when people go down the shore, by and large, they're going to barrier islands or very, very low-lying coastal areas here, right? And I realized, wow, this is up John McPhee's alley. This is exactly what he's talking about. We put ourselves in a beautiful place because we want to be there, but we don't really know how to assume the risk. And we also don't really think about just how dynamic those places are. And so I thought it was a great opportunity to explore that. And that's what this film was really about. And initially it was just going to be a kind of a meditative story. I thought I found my way into the story through the surfers and their frustration with the Army Corps of Engineers and what they were doing to their waves, but also just on a more sort of symbolic level, like this whole manipulation of the coastline and taking something that's wild and beautiful and kind of harnessing it, turning it into, something much less magical, I guess. And I think if you've seen the film, there's a quote in there, that this, maybe people like this, but like, this woman says, I don't like it. It has lost the wildness. Right. So it's that kind of a story that I'm really particularly interested in exploring in Short Up. And it expanded from being this kind of tone poem initially to becoming what it is. And, I realized sea level rise is just so much a part of this conundrum. And also that, in addition to sea level rise, I was waiting for a big storm that we could document so we could see some of these forces at work. And before we had Hurricane Irene, which was kind of a near miss up here. It hit North Carolina, and that was standing in. The film was pretty much done, and we were going with Hurricane Irene as the big storm of note in the film. And then Hurricane Sandy hit, and as you can see from the film, it changed the whole kind of magnitude of the story. So as with a lot of documentaries, it can take a long time for the pieces to come together. And especially with these kinds of stories, it can take a while because I'm often trying to look at what's the next, where are we heading? What are the kinds of issues we need to be thinking about now, planning for? And to me at the time, sea level rise was really the big one. And it's, I think it's much more understood now that sea level rise is a big issue, but at the time it really was, not well understood. So that's how I came to that story. And, I can see at least one question in there. But, just to give you a sense of, before I kind of dive into questions, I am a professor at Drexel now, continue to make documentaries. We were talking before I came in here, I got confused for a second because I've been screening another film of mine, which I just finished, called A River Reborn, which is a pretty optimistic, has a more optimistic kind of lens to it. And it's about the cleanup of rivers damaged by acid mine drainage, which is a vestige of the legacy coal industry here in Pennsylvania. And there's actually a lot of, we've centered the film in Johnstown, and there's actually a lot of really good, there's just a lot of really good movement actually happening around that particular issue. And the rivers there reminded me of some of the rivers in Vermont that I remember growing up, except the rivers in Vermont when I was growing up were already pretty clean. And rivers in Johnstown and in central Pennsylvania are just, and many of them are, they call them yellow boys. They run orange from the magnesium and other metals that are seeped into them. They have no life in them whatsoever, but they're actually finding ways to bring them back to life now. It's a pretty optimistic story. So I'm always trying to balance. I'm not looking at doom and gloom storytelling, even though some of these stories are pretty gloomy. I'm often trying to find, ways to look towards some sort of a version of hope. And like, for instance, another film that I did, which was on Nova 2 years ago, is called Can We Cool the Planet, which looked at a bunch of different ideas, technological and nature-based solutions to try to draw down CO2 and or to cool the planet itself. So, those are, I'm always kind of looking for those things. My feeling is that in my storytelling, takes for granted that climate change is anthropogenic, human-driven, very serious, going to transform the planet. Those are all givens. I've never tried to argue with people who deny that. But so instead, what I'm interested in is like, all right, so then what? What do we do now, right? So, anyways, that's probably enough of me rambling. Do we have?
Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction, Ben. And if more comes to mind, feel free to ramble if there's something you feel you missed. I want to throw in that Judy Pond, I don't know if you saw, but she responded that she was your teacher, and she's so proud of you for doing this excellent work.
Thank you, Judy. Yeah, well, I remember you and your class well, which is something, because my memory is not it's not so great, but thanks so much. So cool to have you here.
Yeah, and before, there is one question here, but we've had some people join us, so I just wanted to remind folks that please type your questions in the chat, and myself and Michael, our director, will read them. If you're unfamiliar with Zoom, put your cursor over the screen. There should be a chat bubble. If not, click the ... more, and that should come up with a chat option. So I'm going to read this question we've got here from Rebecca. Hello, Ben. Financial loss is one of, if not the greatest loss for businesses and residents as a result of these storms. How will these people ever recoup their losses without the government going bankrupt?
I guess I'm curious, are you thinking of like specifically the people in the film, or more so just broadly speaking as sea level rises and storms, impact the coast?
I just asked you to unmute, Rebecca, so you actually probably can say it maybe, or no?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, both. It's happening all over our country, and I'm sure every other country. So I didn't know if that was covered in the film because I saw the last half of it, but or whether you've thought of that or been talking to people about that solution.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the insurance and reinsurance industries are going to have, they've got a lot going on. If there's any industry that is ahead of the ball and not in denial, it's the insurance industries. They recognize what's going on here, and they see their losses increasing. I mean, I think that it's tricky, right? I mean, for better or for worse, a lot of areas are going to become uninsurable. And so, the signals, I mean, one of the things that I tried to get at in the film is just that we send signals through our policies and through the things we subsidize, as Steve Ellis says in the film, you subsidize things that you want, do we really want more of this, right? So it's we are all, I mean, I'm assuming we're all human here. So, sometimes we make decisions that are not rational and logical decisions, and we look to places and to institutions for permission, essentially, or for approval. And so, if something is financially, manageable for us, sometimes we make that decision. And if the underlying fundamentals are not good and somebody's still telling us that like it's okay, you know, it gets confusing. And so, I mean, I think that basically we have to figure out how to disentangle these things and start, you know, like I think the film makes the case for starting to assess the risk and really like build that price in to housing, to development, infrastructure, things like that, because there is no way to make whole, you know, people from the damage that is coming, right? So it's going to be a different kind of paradigm, I think. And so, you know, it's one thing if you're dealing with a storm that, you know, if you're in a floodplain, it's another if you're on a very low-lying part of the coast. But one of the things that happened after the storm is, you know, there was a brief pause in development along the shore, you know, basically enough time for people to clean up the debris. And then it just went gangbusters again, you know, and so, you know, people built maybe a little higher, a little stronger. But, you know, what happened is like people in the film, like Lisa, you know, they were not able to, the people who were working class, middle class, over time, there's a climate gentrification that happens. And so you get people who can afford to be in these places, who can afford to rebuild. And, you know, the people who can't afford to move have to move. And, you know, I think that's like a long conversation, right? About like whether or not that, how you might make adjustments for that, or if you should make adjustments for that, or just how you deal with that question. But yeah, it's just going to get less and less affordable. That's the ultimate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I thought you did a really a good job, and it was really interesting to see the difference between financial situations and how that happened.
Yeah. So I actually had another question for you, Ben. Do you know of any coastal communities that have addressed rising sea levels with a serious plan for development and mitigation that has a real chance for them to adapt in a meaningful way long term?
Let's see. Well, I mean, so I mean, I think it's really, I mean, I would say actually New York City, you know, is doing a lot. I mean, New York City, you know, one of the things the film touches on also is just that, you know, some areas are going to have the concentration of wealth, not just wealth, but the economy to afford to be able to afford to protect themselves. And also just the, you know, the idea that like, we're not going to let New York City go underwater, right? We're going to do everything we can to prevent that from happening as a society, because it's just, you know, it's too important. So places like that, you know, they're doing all kinds of stuff. I mean, my in-laws live in Brooklyn, you know, and when you drive into New York City, into the boroughs, you can see the extensive work that's been done to build out the coastal wetlands there and to create buffer zones. You know, they're doing all kinds of things, I think, that are about as good as you could hope for. But in a lot of other places, I think that people just still aren't really grappling seriously with the level of risk that they're facing. And I think it's hard because, you know, some communities have, you know, leaders who are looking to the future and are trying. But one of the things that happened, which happened after the film was out, so there was this policy called the Bigger Waters Act, which was every 5 years, I think you have to reauthorize the federal flood insurance program. And so right before Hurricane Sandy, they had actually done a lot of policy work, and they had reformed the Bigger Waters Act. And what they were going to do is start to appraise properties based on the risk that they faced in the flood zone. So they're reworking the flood zone maps in order to reflect actuarial risk. And that actually passed right the summer before Hurricane Sandy hit. And then all of a sudden there was an outcry from the representatives in New Jersey, in particular, about the fact that the people in their communities just gotten hit by Sandy and were all of a sudden going to see huge increases in their insurance bills. And so they actually went back and undid the policy change, the Bigger Waters Act, and returned it to the old appraisal system. And so, you know, the real challenge is how to get policies in place. Again, I mean, I don't mean to keep coming back to policies, but that is really the trick here. And it's like, it's not a popular thing to do as a politician, people's insurance bills. And so I don't know what the answer is to that, but I mean, I don't mean to be too negative. There are things, like by and large, no, we're not making big strides. Not as far as I know.
Yeah, can you all hear me okay? My internet seems to be freezing up a bit.
Yeah.
I think especially too, like when asked how do I approach townspeople, did anyone ask me not to, like, as they're combing through the wreckage in the neighborhood, did anyone ask me not to film there? You know, yeah, it's one of those sensitive moments, right? I mean, when I went down and filmed on Long Beach Island, there's some shots where we're driving past houses where you can sort of see through the lower level and things like that. That was us just kind of honestly sneaking in past the Army Corps, not the Army Corps, sorry, the National Guard. That was a few days after the storm. You know, we just knew we needed to get that footage from a journalist perspective. But when we'd stop and talk to people, you know, I mean, this is not, I'm not, you know, doing I don't feel that this is an exploitative practice. I think this is for me, it's a journalistic practice, and just being respectful of people and understanding what they've lost is, you know, you just talk to people as a human. But meeting Lisa and her mom, and Anna, that was something that I did through a network, you know, through my friends at Surfrider. You know, they connected me to them. So you know, a lot of times when you're, you know, I mean, sometimes you just walk up to people, right, and you just ask questions and try to understand what they're experiencing, and then other times it's just harder because you know, you're looking for something specific. But no one asked me not to film. Luckily, the National Guard didn't tell us not to film. So what are they doing to adapt?
Yeah, sorry, my internet glitched out, but I'll read it so everyone can hear it. What are they doing to adapt in Holland, Venice, and other low-lying and heavily populated areas?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the Dutch are kind of like the rock stars of dealing with these kinds of issues. And after Hurricane Sandy, or even after Katrina, you know, they kind of like take their show on the road and they talk to people about the stuff that they're doing. You know, they've been dealing with this issue of sea level rise. I mean, the country's below sea level, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. I mean, you can elevate properties in certain parts of the world. People are experimenting with floating homes. You know, one of the things that you can do is deal with finding ways to buffer against storms. So anything from people create artificial reefs. They use all kinds of living systems, organisms, create reefs out of anything from abandoned subway cars to mussels and oysters, and create oyster beds. And you want to do is find ways to slow down these storm surges, right? Because it's the rising seas are one thing, but it's the storms that are what cause most of the damage. I mean, eventually you're going to be sunk, right, in certain places. And you know, Long Beach Island, I see there's someone here who's been there for a long time. There is flooding on sunny days. You know, you get sunny day flooding where the water just seeps up through the water table and inundates parts of people's yards, et cetera. I mean, if anyone's been to South Beach in Miami, you get the same thing. You know, the streets flood there. They don't have the stoppers on the back of the outflow pipes. So when you get a high tide event, you can get the water flowing into the streets, even if it's a beautiful sunny day. But that said, the big problem is storms. And so the things that you try to do in general are deal with slowing down storm surges. And, you know, in places like Long Beach Island, a lot of the problem, I'm just kind of yeah, okay. So Mike is saying, sorry, I'm jumping ahead in the questions here, but I was going to say that the issue is not so much even the front side of the island where the beach replenishment project is, but the bay side. because on the bay side of these islands, they're all bulkheaded. And there's, what happens when you get these storms is it pushes a huge amount of water into the bays, and it takes days for that to recede. And so what happens is, because those bays are bulkheaded, you can't pour sand on them and raise that elevation up. And so the water just comes over and inundates the island, and in some cases just flows through and creates inlets through the island. And so, you can build up this big wall on the front side of sand, but then the water just always finds a way. It gets around it and floods back through. So, it's not so easy to figure out how to solve for that problem. So, there are things you can do to slow it down for sure. But then of course there's the bigger issue, which is sea level rise, right? I mean, like, how much of this Band-Aid kind of work can you do and before you fix that bigger problem?
So another question is, and there's also a response to it. Do you know of any communities where the government has remunerated residents for their properties and gotten them to move, vacating the area? And then Marie is mentioning that following Tropical Storm Irene, Vermont has taken the approach of incentivizing towns to put in place regulations that prevent development in floodplains and river corridors. So, yeah.
Sorry, Mike. Shh, Mike. I love it. Ask your kids not to yell and they yell back at you. Yes, I mean, I think that's always been like an ideal, a solution, a way of dealing with this. There are programs like Blue Acres program in New Jersey. I think Blue Acres is more than just New Jersey. I think it's a program that exists in multiple states. But yeah, like, right, Irene sort of like skirted along the coast here, but like obviously had huge impacts inland, and throughout New England and New York and New Jersey, everywhere. And so, like, if you're in a floodplain, whether that's an inland floodplain or an ocean floodplain, there are programs out there that will help you move. And actually, in the film, Anna, Lisa's mom, took a buyout. So the two women at the beginning who were walking, in the wreckage of their neighborhood, she did take a buyout and moved. And the problem is those programs are like, wildly underfunded. And also the other issue in this is that whole human nature issue. And it's like, in order to get people to move, you have to figure out how to help them adjust to a new community. It doesn't help to move a patchwork of houses either. You kind of need to move a whole part of a neighborhood so that you can allow that area to return. You can't just, if you move every other house, you're not really helping yourself out at all. And then, the other side to that is that when you move significant numbers of homes, you're also affecting the tax base for towns and communities, which is a real problem. When it comes time to pay for basic infrastructure and so you can imagine in some of these communities, like in Harvey Cedars, where Jonathan Oldham's, not only is he kind of subsidizing the sand for the other communities. I don't know if it's a little in the weeds of the film, but in the film he mentions that they have signed on to the beach replenishment project with the Army Corps, and they pay into that, for which they have to actually create municipal bonds in their town to pay for that sand. The towns next door to them decide they don't need to do it, Love Ladies and North Beach, because they're basically getting, the redistribution of sand is covering their beachfront. And even though it's part of the same beach, same long beach, but they don't want to pay for it. And by not opting into the program, they also don't have to provide access to the beach. So they keep, people can't get to the beach so it's this real, but, and then again, like Harvey Cedars has to pay for that town has to pay for the sand, right? And they have to bond that. So you can imagine what happens if the federal government comes in and starts encouraging people to move out and return parts of the land to nature. Now you're kind of dealing with a double or triple whammy. So it's going to take a lot of money, and it's going to take a lot of different changes so that towns maybe don't have to rely on property taxes quite so much for their survival.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. This is a message that only came to me, but it's definitely meant to be read out. So I'm going to read out. So you have one more former teacher in the audience,
Oh,
despite
yeah.
what the Zoom label says. John Mullins is on here, Susan Mullins.
Oh,
Your former third grade teacher. And he's
hi.
about some of your accomplishments from occasional run-ins with Emily.
Yeah.
Can you
We
please
were
talk
just
about,
talking about you over Passover, John. She was saying she ran into you down in where she lives now. Anyways, that's great. That's so nice to see you.
you have a lot of fans, Ben. And his question was, can you please talk about what you like about your teaching and also how you balance your career as a teacher with furthering your filmmaking successes?
Sure. So, I mean, I've been teaching just for 2 years now, full time. So I started during the pandemic, which is like a bizarre time to start teaching. Yeah, I mean, I really like it. So I'm on campus now for the first time for this year. But, you know, it keeps me, I mean, I really like my students. I have a lot of students who are really interested in documentary, which is really great. It was surprising to me. I wasn't sure. That's kind of my I don't know what you call it, but my mission or my assignment is to help really solidify the documentary program at Drexel. And so, you know, I find that the whole genre of documentary filmmaking is just so wide open and so accessible, and it can be so many things. You know, the kinds of films I make are just one kind of film. And so it really is very creative for students, and it's something that you can do and don't need to spend, you know, months and months laboring over. You can have the practice of making films. And so that for me has been really fun too, because I can get hung up on making films that take a decade to make, and that can get pretty tiresome, and you know, really test your patience. But it's also been really nice because I'm still doing basically as much filmmaking work. I don't have to hustle for other work right now, which and actually, I mean, the truth is I managed to get to a point where all of my work was working with groups like the Nature Conservancy, Penn Environment, other environmental groups. I sort of steered myself in that direction. So it, you know, it's not like I'm working for the man or something like that. I'm not working for Exxon or anybody like that. But it's you know, nonprofits it's hard to make a living in a nonprofit. It's hard to make a living working with them. So this has allowed me to really dive back into watching lots of films and to making films. And Drexel actually has a really, like a lot of universities, I think they're sensing this groundswell amongst the student body that is like absolutely committed to change and social change. And I, you know, I was a TA when I was at Temple getting my MFA, probably like 2005, 6, 7. I was teaching. And I will say that like the orientation of students in terms of their social commitment to environmental justice, to racial justice, every form of justice is, you know, really inspiring and different now. Like it is, you know, it would have been a challenge to have a conversation about a lot of issues that I talk to my students about on a daily basis now, you know, 10 years ago. They wouldn't have been as interested. And I find that people are really engaged. Students just, I mean, they see this is their future, right? Like, especially in terms of the environment, like in climate, and they want to figure out how to solve the problem. And which I find really important to harness. And Drexel is actually doing a great job, like I'm sure a lot of universities are, finding ways and trying to find ways at least to engage students directly in that work. And so, you know, I taught a class last term with an environmental studies professor where she just called me and said, "Hey, I hear you like do films about the environment. I'm a biologist. Want to do a class together?" And we made a class where we had students from like 10 different majors. We would watch a documentary about the environment or a film about the environment in each class, a film that was attempting to talk about some problem with a potential solution. We had them analyzing those films, and then at the end of the term, we had Q&As in every session with the filmmakers and others. And then at the end of the term, they put on their own film festival, the Academy of Natural Sciences here. And, you know, it's just like that kind of helping people find ways to really engage directly is to me like what it's all about. Because it's so hard to sit back and feel like you don't have an outlet in a way to make a difference, right? I mean, that's why you all are part of this organization. So to me, it's great. It's worked out very, I mean, check back in a few years, see if I have tenure or not, but you know, so far so good.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking.
So then I think that I think you already looked at the comment that Mike Hogan put on there. Is that right, Ben?
Yeah, there's a couple of them now. So
Yeah.
public roads are for housing.
Yeah, he was saying I've owned a home
Yeah.
in Beach Haven on Long Beach Island for over 40 years. Spent my childhood summers there. I've seen significant change in the environment and the economics. In the movie, there was some criticism of protecting the new money mansions on the beach, but on the other hand, that protection protects all the homes behind the building line. The oddity is that flood insurance premiums along the beach are lower than those on the bay side of the island, and perhaps the answer is not to have government insurance at all. Great movie.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if that the flood insurance premiums may be lower on the beach side because they have more protection, and the flooding is, you know, more significant on the bay side. So it's possible that that's why it's like that. But yeah, I mean that was kind of the initial idea with the film was, you know, to have these surfers, you know, John Cohen in particular, just kind of musing on, you know, the fact that the storms that bring all the damage are also the ones that surfers look out for, because those are the ones that bring the good waves. And the nature of that is that it's, you know, the storms rearrange the sand. I mean, that's just the nature of these islands. They're really dynamic and almost alive, at least the way I think of them. And so that's just what this is. And like, there's this idea of change that we're not so much attuned to. You know, when you buy a house, you're not, you know, I mean, we just bought a rundown cabin in the Catskills. You know, I'm not worried about whether or not the ground underneath it is going to be there, you know, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. That was not that I could afford a home on the coast either, but like, you know, it's not, I don't think most people even think in those terms though. And I think it's, you know, it's not something that we're wired to think about. And so starting to figure out how to kind of process the world that we live in as a dynamic place and building that into our decisions is probably something that we're going to have to be working on, because the world's getting more and more dynamic, right? And yeah, second homes are not eligible for federal flood insurance. So we can talk about, I mean, if you're interested, we could talk about some of the stuff I'm working on now, or if you have other questions about Short Up.
I had a question that I'm gonna ask for myself now, since we don't have any in the chat at the moment.
Yeah.
I was curious what your experience was talking to those folks you profiled who essentially were denying sea level rise.
Oh God.
And like, if you know where they are now. Maybe too much to ask.
Yeah,
yeah, I was just
Harry Simmons is like in jail, I think. Oh my God. So that's the guy who's kind of in like the vaguely Hawaiian shirt who gets in, there's like a chorus. Oh no. Can you hear my daughter's saxophone now?
It's beautiful.
Home office. Pink Panther, I think is what she's doing on the saxophone. So Harry Simmons was in the back and forth with Carolyn Justice, who's the legislator, where they're talking about the number of jetties and number of groins and, you know, how many were in the bill initially. She's like, you know, there were 16 in the bill and we got it down to 4. And he's like, there were never 16, there was only ever 4. Basically, he's like a shill for the coastal development forces, right? People want to push development. Before he was doing that work, he was like a disgraced record producer. I don't know where he got his kind of credentials from, but you know, I did a couple Q&As with him, and I mean, he you know, long story short, it was something gross that had to do with, like, I don't even know if it was sort of like child pornography, something terrible. He's gone out of the picture, like, in disgrace. So it's all just completely predictable. I mean, the guy was just, you know, he didn't care about the consequences of, I mean, I feel like I'm repeating what Rob says in the film, but, you know, the consequences of his actions were irrelevant to him. And I think it's, you know, I don't know where Tommy Thompson is coming from in his head, the guy who's the head of the NC-20 with the silver hair, and who was saying that, like, they don't base their decisions on what some scientist and some computer model somewhere, you know, like, just completely dismissing, science and research and the whatever had formed the basis of their policy decisions in the state until then. And they're these people, they're dealing in short-term cycles and profit. They've got jobs working for organizations that have a supposed mission, and they're doing what they think they should be doing to forward that mission. I don't know how people, kind of reconcile all of that other than to just not think about it very much, and just to take home a paycheck. But yeah, I mean, North Carolina was a really unfortunate story because they really were kind of taking a lead on all of this until the Tea Party took over in 2012 and really reversed a lot of the good work that people had, or 2010, and reversed a lot of the good work. So yeah, but they've still got a lot more undeveloped beachfront that they can protect. So hopefully that hasn't gone. They're not going the way of New Jersey entirely. No, sorry, New Jersey. That's.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you. And I've actually made it so people can unmute themselves. So if you want to raise your hand to ask a question, you're also welcome to do it that way, because we've just gone through all of our ones in the chat. But I mean, unless you have anything else, Michael, that I've missed.
No, I think that's it.
So I'd be happy. Yeah.
Yeah. I noticed that Marie had put in here that she believes second homes are not eligible for FEMA buyouts, only primary residences.
Great. Well, if that's the case, I'd be happy for you to talk about what you're working on right now.
Yeah.
And as you suggested, yeah.
Sure. Oh, Judy, did you have a question?
Here, I asked you to unmute, Judy. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi, Ben. As a retired teacher and a very proud one, I'm curious about what advice you have for teachers today to get, I mean, you can assign, well, just kinds of things people should be teaching kids about ecology and about how to respond.
It's a really good question. And I don't know that I have a great answer. I mean, in part because I teach college students. I mean, it's funny because like my daughter, she has a terrific science teacher. My kids have a terrific science teacher at their school who's a friend of ours. And we talk about this, and I've come in to talk to her kids sometimes. It's like this real balance between, how old their kids, who's too young to hear, when are you old enough to kind of, hear part of what's really going on. I don't know how to, I mean, the truth is, like, it's just hard to know what people can handle, right? And you don't want to sugarcoat things. You don't want to pretend like, the situation is not really serious. But on the other hand, like, I mean, we talk about, my daughter's very aware of, like, she gets upset when it's raining and 35 degrees and not snowing, and she attributes that to climate change, and where do I, as a parent, at least, where do you go with that, let alone as a teacher, right? Like, and so the science is really incredibly precise at this point. I mean, there's the attribution, there's the ability to attribute particular storms to a percentage chance of how much those storms are influenced by climate change, right? So, like, when there's big storm events, there's a network that goes to work to try to figure out how to quickly get information to news sources to tell them, like, how much of that storm was related to climate change and how much was just normal storm activity. And I think with kids, to me, it's like, it's all about solutions. It's all about, like, understanding foundationally a good handle on science, understanding how the world works so that you can understand how we are intervening in it, and then understand how, you can, some ways to untangle that and either fix it or make it not as bad might be. I think that, like, that's, to me, that's where my work is at this point, is all in solutions. And I mean, identifying problems, of course, too. And sometimes the stories are not the solutions are not even sometimes good solutions, but I mean, I think that the conversation really has to be about solutions right now. And I mean, it sounds like what you all are doing is involved with finding solutions on a local level. I mean, I'm working on a film right now that's about solutions in there's a community in Philadelphia that's been that gets routinely flooded from more and more from climate related flooding. What are they going to do in this community? Do they relocate? Do they, what are the solutions for this community? What are solutions for others in Philadelphia to this idea of solar geoengineering, which is even the people who are suggesting research into it don't suggest that it's any sort of solution. It's just a potential band-aid to get us to buy us time to do the real work. And I think that, like, to me, what's important is that people are knowledgeable enough to be able to understand when they're being sold a bill of goods or a sort of unicorn, and when they're actually, how to differentiate between ideas that have promise and ideas that are just, pie in the sky. Because as somebody who follows a lot of this stuff, there are a lot of people who are out there marketing at this point, whether it be ideas for pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. I mean, anyways, I've kind of gone off on a tangent here, but I think what I feel like is, like, there's a certain amount of science literacy and climate literacy that's critical. And, everyone needs to kind of have enough of that to be able to separate between good and bad ideas. Yeah, Judy.
Unmute. Right. And it seems to me that teachers ought to be teaching kids to use their skills for practical purposes, like changing the world. And I had a biology teacher way back in the 60s in college who taught a service course for non-majors. And every single thing he taught was because he had a clear idea of how we could act on that knowledge. And so to see you using your skills this way, you're just a great model for other people. But it seems to me that kids in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, you can get them started using their writing or their art for some purpose.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it can be very small changes that give you the energy you need to continue forward, and who knows where people go with things. I mean, my daughter during the pandemic, a lot of people were ordering food in places like Philadelphia to keep restaurants going, doing takeout and things like that. Once we knew that, COVID didn't pass through food and through touch. But very, very quickly, what we realized was that everybody was using tons of plastic and still are, right? And so, we started a blog that was meant to be like kids recommending restaurants to other kids to get, but then we were discussing, how do you note in the restaurants that are using paper, compostable, did I freeze there? Sorry.
I lost you. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
You're back.
I think I froze for a second. Yeah. Anyhow, I think I don't know what you heard, but basically, like, she was able to kind of at least, lure other people to restaurants that are using compostable materials, so that they could make good decisions in that way. But yeah, I totally agree. I mean, everything I do with my students is about trying to get them to assert themselves.
That's great. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
I want to call out that we
Sure.
only have 10 minutes left. So anyone who wants to ask something, pop it in the chat or raise your hand. And then I want to give you the opportunity to, as you mentioned before, just quickly talk about what you're working on right now.
Sure. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to switch my internet signal here. Okay, I think this is a stronger one.
Okay. Did you hear what I just said, or did you blip out?
No, well, I heard you saying the part about talking about my work, or
Yeah.
okay, sure. Yeah, so I mean, I have a couple projects I'm working on right now. One of them is kind of looking at the city of Philadelphia, which has this, aging infrastructure and is the poorest big city in the US. And at the same time has an office of sustainability that has set out some pretty ambitious guidelines for getting the city to 100% renewable. And my big thesis or question is, how do you do that? What does that look like in a big city like this that doesn't have tons of money like New York to say throw at a problem? And what needs to happen in order to get there? And this community I mentioned that's like constantly flooding is one of the communities that we'll look at. There's another that's doing a ton with community solar. And the city is the largest municipal gas company, municipally owned gas company in the country, PGW. How do you have 100% renewable with a gas company, right? So like there's some really interesting issues to dig into there. And to me, this is actually a project Drexel's like very interested in it. And I know on a local level, this can really drive a conversation and a dialogue and force people to reckon with, how do you put up, are these just words? And is this just an empty idea, or are we going to really, make this work? So that's one project. And the other is I've been following the scientist David Keith at Harvard for the past 7 years, as he has been pushing forward this outdoor research of solar geoengineering. Solar geoengineering is the idea that you might spray, it basically mimics certain volcanic eruptions like Mount Pinatubo, which in those cases shoot sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere and cool the planet. And so Mount Pinatubo in 91 erupted, cooled the planet by over 1 degree Fahrenheit for about 1.5 to 2 years. And so this has been around for a while, the idea being, well, basically, could we do the same thing in order to buy time to cool the planet? And I probably don't have to tell you that there's a lot of reasons why this is a terrible idea. And, many reasons, both scientific, governance, and so on and so forth. So, I kind of think of it as like the logical extreme of beach replenishment in some ways. It's like a manipulation engineering solution to a problem that doesn't actually solve the problem, right? It just deals with one of the symptoms. So, but the truth is, this guy David Keith is really quite brilliant. He's also one of the founders of one of the biggest direct air capture companies in the world that pulls CO2 out of the air. And he's just a very smart person. And to me, what this film and this story is all about, the question is, do we start outdoor research in this, or does doing that send the wrong signals and create, people getting a sense that we can get out of jail for free, right? That's one big criticism of it. But to me, it's really more of a sort of Damocles kind of story, like if we don't get our act together and really aggressively cut emissions and do all these other things, then to me, this is where we're heading no matter what. That's my judgment of the human species, is that like this idea, as crazy as it might sound or has sounded, is only going to gain more and more traction. And so those are the questions the film deals with, and hopefully it's a way to redirect people to think about, the fact that like we can have this conversation about solar geoengineering, and we kind of have to start having it because it's going to gain traction. But on the other hand, we know what we need to do, right? And like we don't need to debate that. And so hopefully it's a way of kind of reframing the really important and urgent needs that we have to address in terms of renewables. So those are the two big projects I'm working on now.
Yeah, thank you. That is a controversial and fascinating topic. And I saw we had someone ask for your email address, and you just put it in the chat. Thank you. It's very kind of you.
Sure, happy to talk. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's figuring out what the right story is for me is the big challenge, and I don't know that I get it right. And honestly, I've been nervous a lot about this story about solar geoengineering because I understand the risks involved, and there are people that I respect in a lot of ways, like Michael Mann and others who don't want people to even talk about this subject, and so I have my own reservations about that. But I also, I think that like we're not at a point in time where we're at a point in time where I think like we have to kind of think about almost everything, and at least go through the process of thinking about it and evaluating it and understanding how things fit together. Because one of my big concern is that most of us don't realize the lag time that it exists between when you put emissions up and when they kind of have their full effect. And the feedback loops that we're seeing are kind of disturbing. They're at the far end of the spectrum from what scientists had projected. And so I wish they weren't called positive feedback loops. I don't know who decided that was the right terminology. They're pretty negative, but it's this question of like, how fast can we act? How fast will we act? And where will we find ourselves? What options will we have, in say 10 years or 15 years? So, to me, it's like, how do I spend my time most effectively communicating about this stuff? It's not, that's kind of what I try to sort out as I'm picking subjects.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great kind of explanation of your thought process. And I'll say now that I would love to email with you more about other films you've done, because this is a monthly film series, and I'd love to see what else we could show on some of these topics.
Sure, absolutely. I think
I'm
happy to come back too. Judy, did you have a sign on your wall that said "I ate grandma" and then "I, ate grandma"? Do you remember?
I did, and I have a T-shirt with that on it too.
For some reason, I just have always remembered that. So.
I think commas with nouns of address are falling out of use.
My wife is much better at grammar. My daughter is actually a better grammarian than I am, so I can't claim that I learned.
But I don't consider it one of the worst problems in the world, so you got other things to worry about more.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to.
It's good. I'm glad to know you remember that.
I might need one of those T-shirts.
Rebecca says, Ben, you're doing great work. Good film. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah. And we're at time almost. So yeah, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about your film. It's a treat to have someone from this area on as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And also your positive message with all of the different negative feedback loops that you are exposed to in your filmmaking. It's great that you're doing the work that you're doing and inspiring young people to look towards the future and what can be done about it. That's really great.
I mean, I honestly, I go back and forth, but I've been, I don't know if I'm optimistic. I don't think that's the right word, but I do think having taken a deep dive into a lot of the ideas that are out there, I think it's actually not. It's really not a question of whether we can do it, and I know that maybe sounds a little bit like naive. I mean, but it's just it's really a matter of being smart about how we do it, and the right combination of ideas at the right time, and then the right energy behind it and policy behind it. But I mean, honestly, like what's as horrible and tragic as what's going on in Ukraine is right now, it is actually going to push Europe and the rest of us to move even more quickly away from gas and oil and coal. And I think that we are seeing a lot of things come together in the world at this moment that I think are very positive. So it's really just a race. We're in a race. That's what we're in. We've got the tools. So anyway, there's my optimistic Friday night perspective.
Thank you.
You're getting lots of thank yous in the chat. So we really appreciate hearing from you. Thanks so much.
It was so nice to see you all. And Judy and John, really great to see you both too. So cool.
Bye. Have a good evening.
job.
Thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Good night.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Ciao.